Welcome back to another opportunity to learning, growing, and evolving together, dropping into and exuding that peace and that power that's at our core, and it's just a matter of uncovering that peace and that power. Now, I left this catchy title of Why I Love Anxiety because I do love anxiety. I don't love all parts of it. I don't like the dread of it and the misery of it when it gets to that level. But I love what anxiety has taught me and the teacher that anxiety is. Because here's the message, and I shared this in my last video too. Anxiety is showing us where we are not free. In other words, the things that trigger our anxiety are showing us where we need to work on. Because when we get triggered and we get caught up in those anxious feedback loops, in those anxious cycles, that trigger and that anxiety is pulling us away from our core selves. It's pulling us away from ourselves, and then we begin to identify in the emotions, we begin to identify with the anxiety, and that is where we get caught up in powerlessness. So, anxiety is showing us, by us getting worked up, by us feeling the anxiety, showing us what it is that's bothering us and what we need to work through in order to come back to that peace and that power that exists within us. So really, anxiety is a teacher, right? Anxiety, of course, it feels terrible. The dread of it, how it locks your body up, how it locks your mind up. I know this, right? But it's incredible because it is giving us a light. It's giving us a notification of where we need to work. Right? Because anxiety is often just a symptom of being disconnected from ourselves, right? Because we have our core self, and in that core self is that peace and is that power where we trust ourselves. We know what we want, we know what we need, we know what we're after, our values, our needs, etc. And then we have that blanket over, or that mud covering that core self, which is the conditioning that we've received, which is the habits that we've learned from society, like the things that are telling us that we should be a certain way or we need to be a certain way in order to receive love or to feel enough or to feel worthy. And so when we get caught in the outer core of the self, the lowercase s self, instead of the core uppercase s self, when we get caught in that conditioning, in the habits, in the things that we think we should be or need to be in order to feel that love, when we get caught there, that is where we often get lost in anxiety. Instead of really having that confidence and that trust within ourselves. And so really, I say I love anxiety because anxiety has shown me that these are the things that I need to work on. How I show up in relationships. There are certain things that trigger my anxiety within relationships, right? How I'm spoken to, okay? The conversations that come up. What are they about? What is it that's triggering me within these conversations? Or maybe when I show up to the work that I'm wanting to do. What is it that's causing me anxiety? What is it that's triggering me to get caught up in an anxious feedback loop? When we can become aware of these things that are triggering us and pulling us away from ourselves, that self-awareness is where we can flip our perspective and choose how we want to show up instead of reacting and getting caught in them and then lost in them, going from that level 1 anxiety into a level 10 anxiety where we become powerless, we lose ourselves in that. And of course, I didn't know anything about anxiety being a symptom of being disconnected from myself because I was so identified with the anxiety. I was so caught up in the emotions, in the intensity, in the negative feedback loops, in all that was going on that anxiety was. And at that time, I didn't know why I was experiencing what I was experiencing. I didn't even know what anxiety actually was in itself. I didn't know why I was feeling the way that I was feeling. And as I have grown, I've been able to recognize the difference between the two because as I've grown, I've been able to create that space between my core S self and that conditioned lowercase s self, right? And what is most important for me to share here, because I know that my younger self would have loved to hear this when I was watching YouTube videos as a kid and learning from other people, is that anxiety is not a life sentence and that we have the ability to change. And the first step in changing is simply committing to ourselves, promising to ourselves that we are going to begin showing up for ourselves, even in the smallest of ways. Because when we show up for ourselves, aka in health, aka in respecting what we want and what we don't want, it's these small steps that start to clear the way for us to see exactly who we are instead of who society has wanted us to be, how our parents have wanted us to be, how we felt we needed to be accepted by friends or by community, etc. And then we get to create and uncover how we want to show up because it's already in here. We know what we need. We know what we want. It's just a matter of going through the muck of the conditioning, the muck of some of the anxiety to get to that place. And so one really great example that I have come across in this journey of healing is this woman who was so caught up in her emotions, so caught up in her anxiety that it was difficult for her to show up at work on a regular basis. It was difficult for her to have conversations because of social anxiety on a regular basis, where she was so caught up in the negative feedback loops that she couldn't clearly articulate herself. She couldn't really connect with herself because there was that fog. And so what she ended up doing, and I heard this story from another coach, was that she just simply started having a glass of water every morning before she started her day. And I know this sounds ridiculous, but this is a first step, and here's why. She made a commitment to herself to have this glass of water, and every time that she had that glass of water, she was showing herself that she could show up for herself and that she could trust herself in showing up. And so this little simple goal that she had for a 30-day span ended up breeding so much trust in herself, so much confidence in herself, that it was able to tip over into other things. So she started to have a healthier breakfast. She started to have more fruit in her breakfast. She started to have lighter foods that she was feeling good as a result of eating. And so she made a promise to herself to do this for 30 days. And slowly but surely, as she started to tip the scales in trusting herself instead of being uncertain and insecure within herself, she started to pull out that power and that piece of the core self, right? And it was just a simple extraction of pulling out and starting to express in the way that she knew how and that was possible for her. And there's many ways of going about this in whatever looks good for you. Asking yourself, what do I want? This is what I ask myself when I get anxious sometimes, can help us come back to connecting with our core selves. Making sure that when we ask ourselves what we want, we are not listening to what we think somebody else wants or what we think society wants us to be, but rather really listening, what do I want? How can I make this happen in a sustainable way that I can build long-lasting results? And this is how we start the journey to really starting to exude that power and really starting to trust ourselves. And then we could introduce the other practices, like trusting ourselves that we could show up for a meditation practice, trusting ourselves that we could show up for a yoga practice. Or you can start with yoga or meditation, however you want it to be. But then we can introduce these other practices that start to dig even more of that conditioning off and start to do even more work on those triggers that are showing us where we're not free, so that instead of these triggers being this big blinding light in our face that prevent us from being able to see what else is in the room, then we start to do the work on these triggers so that instead of this big blaring light, we have these little Christmas lights. And instead of getting so lost in them because they're so bright, now they are kind of like a decorative piece, showing us where we've come from, showing us the work that we've done, that now the character that we have. And here's the other reason I love anxiety, because it has brought me to the place that I am in now, where I feel more connected with myself than I ever have before. And it's a journey. I'm not saying it's not a journey, but it has brought me into a place where I feel so much more at ease with myself because I have been pushed by my anxiety to learn about what is underneath, what's causing that anxiety. And then I started to do the work on it. I started to trust myself more. And now I'm in this place where I really, really trust myself. And I'm still continuing to grow because the work is never done. But I'm not so crippled by the anxiety that I had that now I can show up in a way that I really want to. And I'm not lost in the fog. There's not as much fog here. And I could really connect with people. I could really connect with my work. I could really connect with what I want to create in this life for me, what I want to experience in this life for me, instead of getting lost in it. And I say again, I'm here growing and learning with you. The work is never done. It just gets a little bit easier. We get a little bit more trustful in ourselves. We get a little bit more confident. And life becomes a little bit more easy because we are choosing how we are showing up instead of reacting. If this has been beneficial for you, if you feel like you've learned something from this, let's have a conversation about it. Share, ask a question. I want to learn from you just as you might be taking things from this video. It goes both ways because we're learning together. Each person's experience can complement the whole, can complement another person's experience. Aside from that, I want to share some big news with you that I am holding my first meditation retreat ever in June 2nd to June 5th in Mexico. You could see the details down here below. It's going to be a really fun time. It's going to be a transformative experience. I'm excited to bring everything that I know into this experience so that perhaps my experience could help another person really come back to what they want and start to exercise that in their lives. Otherwise, I look forward to seeing you in the comments, maybe on Instagram if you want your conversation to be private, or in the next video. Much love. Let's exude that peace and that power, build that trust in ourselves, and live a life of more ease, more confidence, and maybe even more direction. Much love.